Hello YouTube and welcome back to World of Warships with Wadres again. And before we get started on this video, just going to roll through the as of now normal disclaimers. So I also want to apologize if you hear any random noises in the background. My father is kind of doing some minor house home improvement projects in the background, so you might just kind of hear power tools or whatever just kind of go off lightly in the background, and there's really not a whole lot that I can do about that. I have spent the majority of my time in World of Warships today just trying to play around with the HMS Furious after some of the changes that have come through as in regards to the 8.2 update, which changes her dive bomber loadout specifically. Her dive bombers, the actual squadron size hasn't changed, but the number of aircraft that participate in an attack run is now 2 instead of 1 as it was previously, which I will say definitely makes them a little bit more functional in some regards, but it also has the downside of completely changing everything that I've basically said in regards to the dive bombers on this aircraft carrier in the first place, because the accuracy, everything, it changes with this update because the reticle size has increased, among other things. So I've actually spent the vast majority of the day not only playing the Furious, but I have been trying to accustomize myself to these new dive bombers. While I would like to say that I have been enjoying using them, that really is more of a case of, well, kind of don't really have much of a choice in some cases, because the torpedo bomber's loadout is still kind of small, and if you get stuck against any AA, you're kind of stuck with these dive bombers, which they are effective, don't get me wrong, especially now that you have 2 of them in the attack run instead of just 1, which was lousy if I do say so myself. But it just makes life a little bit more interesting when the AA is a little bit more powerful and just overall, yeah. The one thing that I will say, though, is that with having played the Furious for the vast majority of the day, I have gotten better and better at making sure these dive bombers are actually hitting the target. I even set myself up, at least at the start of the day, in a couple of training rooms, and just sat there trying to figure out roughly where I should position the reticle, things like that, just to try and get as much out of individual targets as I can, to the point where as long as I come across a reasonably large target, I can hit it with reasonable accuracy. And if I come across a destroyer even, I at least know where I can focus on having the destroyer in my reticle, or project having it in the reticle at least, if I choose to drop bombs on a destroyer. And at least expect to get semi-reasonable damage. As a result of all of this, though, I have had some interesting matches over the course of the day, and I just figured I would share them with all of you. Well, I'm probably not going to talk all the way through all of it, but the basic point being that I've just kind of had a roller coaster of a day overall, just because with all of the AA changes and whatnot, and the fact that the Royal Navy aircraft carriers, that their planes are kind of slow to start with. They kind of just hang in AA bubbles, and I've noticed that they really just don't have the kind of survivability necessary to really stick around and do an incredible amount of damage before they should get shot down. Which also comes to one of the things that I'm kind of wishing is that with the Royal Navy aircraft carriers, they might want to consider just kind of reducing the cooldown time on some of the aircraft carrier or aircraft replacement, just because these carriers lose planes like it's nobody's business. And it's kind of been driving me a little bit nuts, especially with the Furious, where, granted, against Tier 8 against Tier 8 AA, I should say, she should probably suffer at least somewhat. But at the same time, when I can't even get more than one strike off from an entire strike group of torpedo bombers in a zone where I come across a fully focused Tier 8 AA, I may as well just consider myself to be a completely worthless ship. That they just don't have the survivability, the tank ability, to really get through a fairly well concentrated AA setup. One of the other things that I have had some kind of hit and miss, if you'll forgive the pun, issues with these dive bombers specifically, is just that there are some times where I'll have a beautifully lined up bombing run, and even the ship ends up exactly where I want it in the reticle, and for whatever reason the RNG just says nope, and the bombs will disperse completely out to the sides around the ship and do basically nothing. Which, dare I say, is an extremely annoying occurrence. There were a couple of times, even in the training runs that I was talking about just a little bit ago, actual training runs with completely stationary, and in a couple of cases just mobile but not loaded out ships, where I would have a beautiful, an absolutely beautiful run lined up, right, putting a destroyer even right where I wanted it. I drop the bombs, and the bombs go everywhere in the reticle except where the ship is. Just kind of leading me to have one of those moments where I just kind of sit there looking at the screen like, seriously? Are you kidding me with this? So yeah, I've had some, dare I say, I've had quite a bit of frustration working with these dive bombers for most of the day, and it just, in some ways, it wasn't getting better, no matter how hard I tried. Now, one thing that I can say with confidence, after all of this work, all of this practice even, is that I have started to realize just how much, in some ways, of a shortcoming the British aircraft carriers have in regards to their torpedoes. Granted, this is still the Tier 6 aircraft carrier working with the HMS Furious. I have not even considered trying to move up to the Implacable, just because the Implacable has had no real changes done to her, and I already know that I am not comfortable working with that ship. Granted, I haven't worked with it in quite the same regard as I have with the Furious over the last couple of days, but if my experience with Tier 8 AA is anything to go by working with the Furious, I'm not thinking I'm going to have any real luck with the Implacable's dive bombers at Tier 8 if I even so much as get a hint of Tier 8, let alone Tier 10 AA. These aircraft really lack in survivability. I mean, sure, they're a little bit more on the efficient side in regards to their actual attack runs in some cases, especially the dive bombers. But in other regards, if they start taking AA, they take AA hard, and they just don't really survive it well. The only time I've noted that the Furious really does well against AA is when she is top tier, as with just about any other aircraft carrier, maybe not counting the Implacable so much, but just where the AA is semi-non-existent and something that the planes, these low survivability aircraft, are more than capable of at least handling within reason. Now, I will also say that unfortunately a couple of these matches that you're going to be seeing are not quite in order. Granted, they weren't exactly sequential matches either, but the match that you actually just finished watching was the second one, and the match that is just now starting, or should be, yeah, there we go, was actually the first match I meant to show you all, where basically is kind of a point in case for where I was at the start of the day. Now, granted, this was a low-tier match starting off, but it was also like my second or third run after actually getting into matches with the Furious, not getting away from the training rooms, and I was still kind of getting the hang of dropping bombs on moving targets. So I was still trying to figure out a little bit in regards to just projecting what a ship was doing as far as making my actual bombing runs, as well as just trying to survive in the first place. And this is where I also have to point out that even Tier 7 AA just... It seriously hurts these planes to the point where you really don't want to mess with it too much. And when I keep talking about the AA, and you'll see what I mean in a little bit in regards, especially with the next match that you're going to be seeing, when I'm talking about just how bad these aircraft handle AA and whatnot. But it's just been a real roller coaster of a try, just getting used to these dive bombers. And I'm going to keep coming back to that over and over and over again. One of the other things that I'm probably going to be doing over the next couple of days is trying to focus on getting the hang of working with the US Navy dive bombers as well, with some of the tricks that I've been hearing about lately. I've already tried them in training rooms a couple of times as well with my Midway, and while they are promising, again, they aren't really against moving ships because, well, they were done in training rooms. So, now granted, the one test run that I did with the Midway as a whole was done with an entire fleet of destroyers, and one of the things that really didn't help in that case either was the fact that this entire fleet of destroyers I decided for whatever reason to have actually active with AA. They weren't moving around the map, but they had active AA, which you'd be surprised how quickly even destroyers in the AA system now at Tier 10 can just work over a CV's aircraft. It was like ridiculously difficult to actually get a strike group of dive bombers close enough to close to these destroyers and actually get in more than 2 strikes before the entire strike group was actually shot down. There weren't even any that actually made it back to the carrier, so after a while in that training room, I even actually just had to sit there for a few minutes to let my aircraft replenish before I could do anything else, and trying to continue basically my experimentation. Regardless, I think I can still safely say that I am far more confident in trying to use my dive bombs against larger targets like cruisers or battleships as opposed to destroyers, simply because, well, they're easier to hit. I'm sorry to say it bluntly, but the destroyers, I'm having a real hard time getting any level of timing right as far as just hitting destroyers that are sitting stationary, let alone moving around the map at all. In fact, when I did switch up things a little bit and have a moving destroyer or two, my chances of actually doing anything to them, my chances of even just hitting them, went basically to almost nothing, just because those things are awfully damn nimble, you know? And even if you wait until the last possible second where the bombs are as close to the target in the drop arc as you will be able to drop them, there were a couple of points where I was right on the money for that destroyer, and even just within the time where I clicked the mouse, dropped the bombs, and the bombs in that very, very short window dropped down to the destroyer, it just slipped out of the target reticle. And it was extremely frustrating. So, yeah, I think if you see me continuing to move forward with the any videos on CVs, you're probably going to see me not going after small targets like destroyers just as a habit, which is something that I already do anyway, because I cannot dependably hit a destroyer with any of the ordnance that I'm using. I mean, torpedoes, you have to drop them so far back that the destroyer can just basically laugh its way around them. With rockets, the damage is so minimal, unless, like with the Midway, I'm using the tiny Tim rockets, at which point I've gotten random detonations on those. But beyond that, it's like I use any other rocket loadout, and the damage just... It's crap. It does literally nothing to the destroyers. I may as well just take those rockets and go throw them in the ocean. So I think Wargaming has nerfed the rockets so badly into ineffectiveness that this new attack unit that they've introduced is basically worthless in a lot of ways, unless you're using something that has decent penetration that can actually do a substantial amount of damage in a single hit, as opposed to just scattershotting in an entire small area. And also have in mind that this is the experience I'm having with bot destroyers that are opening up AA at max range. This isn't even getting into the problems I'm sure players are having with destroyers in random or clan or ranked matches, where the destroyers are running around with their AA off. And at least until a CV is within their AA detection range, at which point the CV is already having to try and scramble to try and hit the destroyer anyway with what's already going to be a very inaccurate shot, unless they happen to be very good at predicting where that destroyer is going to be. Something that I can say, hands down, I don't have that kind of confidence. I'm sorry. I would like to be able to see my target before I even start trying to set up a run. So, yeah, that there is that in mind as well. I don't see carriers being anywhere near as effective against destroyers, especially with the rocket attack planes specifically, as they should be. Throw in the fact that with this update, Wargaming has also taken away the radio location for aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers trying to do anything against destroyers in any sort of competitive or player versus player scenario, unless you've got somebody else who's spotting the destroyer from the surface, they may as well not even bother going after destroyers at all, because they just have so limited chances in being able to actually spot those destroyers before they have to be able to start setting up their attack runs. So I just think... I think Wargaming is trying to cater a little bit too much to the destroyer players, to say the least. And this is actually something that I have to go back to a little bit in regards to one of the community contributor videos that I was watching just, I think it was yesterday. No Zoop for You was talking about, I think it was the US Navy dive bombers, where he was talking about them saying, oh my god, these bombs are so effective. If they are dropped under the right circumstances, they can do substantial amounts of damage to destroyers. And the only thing I can't help but think is, wow, somebody finally found a way to make these aircraft carriers in this iteration actually functional against destroyers. And then he starts saying, oh, maybe they need to actually nerf the dive bomber damage now to make the destroyers actually have something that they can do against aircraft carriers with the dive bombs now. And the only thing that went through my mind was, oh, fuck no. And I'm sorry for the language, but they're already nerfing the carriers into the ground as it is. I've already come across a couple of players who used to be CV mains who refuse to even touch the aircraft carriers anymore because they consider them to be thoroughly unplayable with absolutely useless damage. And in some ways I kind of have to agree with them. I fully understand where they're coming from, because trying to get any reasonable amount of damage with the carriers after the rework takes an incredible amount of effort on the carrier's part, and the reward that they're getting for it is negligible at best. So yeah, I have absolutely okay, just trying to get my thought rearranged here a little bit. I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that these carriers need help. They don't need more nerfs. You've basically already neutered them to the point of being virtually ineffective. I don't care how many players are going around saying, oh my god, they're still overpowered in matches that have them. The reason they're overpowered in the matches that have them is because you've got random matches now that have 2 CVs with the kind of power that can keep ships perma-spotted if the CVs coordinate their attack runs. So yeah, in that sense, I guess they're overpowered in that way. Even after all of the... But again, that's because you have 2 CV matches. You don't have... If you look at single CV matches, there's still a decent amount of time where an aircraft carrier has, as far as just downtime, before it gets planes out to a target. And a destroyer can do a lot of crap within that time frame. So yeah, that's just... It just bugs me. All of the community contributors saying, oh yeah, hey, look, here's CVs. CVs are doing decent damage with this. Oh, well, it's time for the nerf, time to bring the nerf bat out on this one because, you know, this just seems like it's a little too effective. Well, you know what? Get rid of the CVs then, because if you keep up with the nerf bat, nobody's going to want to play them, even new players. So yeah, it's... I'm ranting. I apologize. It's been driving me bonkers thinking about this because it's so utterly ridiculous how much people want to neuter and just completely destroy the effectiveness of aircraft carriers. And that doesn't apply just to the community contributors. It also comes back to some of the players who are just, no matter what you do, as long as there are CVs in the game, they're just going to hate CVs, want to see them thoroughly ineffective and gone or whatever. And no matter what, you're not going to make everybody happy. Wargaming's trying to make everybody happy, and well, you're not going to, because okay, you're gonna make the naysayers who want the CVs to do less damage to them run how the CVs play, but then you're gonna have the CVs coming back and saying, what are we supposed to do? You're taking away all of our damage. You're taking away all of our effectiveness. And honestly, that's the way I feel playing with some of the aircraft carriers lately, is it's especially the Midway, where I've tried pulling out my torpedo bombers. I think in a couple of matches lately. And the torpedo bombers, after the flooding and damage nerf, yeah, I'm not saying that I can't still get good torpedo hits, but the damage is just not there anymore. And this was a ship that, granted, apparently they're supposed to rely on their HE dive bombers now, but now you've got people who are saying, oh, the HE dive bombers need to be nerfed now. Like, what the fuck do you want, people? Say what you really want. Say that you don't want them around anymore, but at least be honest about that fact. Personally, I just want to have the RTS aircraft carriers back and go back to the way with aircraft carriers actually being usable and good, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sure there are a lot of other CV players who would agree with me. Because honestly, this rework, again, in so many ways just seems like an inordinate amount of bullshit. Now, granted, some of the AA changes, those I don't mind so much. As long as the CVs were effective, I really didn't mind the AA being changed to be a little bit more semi-interactive like it is now. But by the same token, it's just... it just seems like Wargaming is trying too hard to keep everybody happy, and with the result being that nobody's really going to be happy with it until either aircraft carriers are gone and the carrier players have no leg to stand on, or the carriers are just in such an overpowered state that everybody else is crying foul because the carriers are just doing too much damage and running rampant over them. And I get the feeling that the naysayers who think that the carriers are just running rampant over them are just going to be too far outspoken for too long, to the point where they may as well just remove the aircraft carriers anyway, because you're never going to make any of them happy to begin with. Oh boy. Yeah, again, I apologize. I got ranting, but it's been really getting on me. Some of the things that have been going on that I've been hearing in regards to the aircraft carriers since the rework even just started going through. It's ridiculous. And I just want the carriers to be in a state where they're usable. Have functional damage output, things like that. And yeah, yeah. And by the way, this match in the background is the one I was talking about a little bit ago in regards to a Royal Navy carrier at Tier 6, the Furious, facing off against Tier 8 AA. I mean, I've actually reached a point where I can't do a single damn thing. I may as well be in one of the old RTS carriers having been deplaned, because I've got nothing I can do against any of the ships that are attacking me. My team flat out disintegrated, where I was left at the end of the match with nothing to do but basically just sit there and watch my ship die. And by the way, that was my best damaging match of the day, I might add, with close to 65,000 damage done in the Furious, with 47 bomb hits, 24 rocket hits, if that says anything about how desperate I was to do anything to these ships. And yeah, I mean, even when the carrier gets 81 secondary battery hits because everything's that close, you know things are bad. But yeah, I think I've said my piece in many regards, and I should probably let you all move away from me for a little bit and hear what others have to say, I suppose, though I don't think they're going to be saying anything different from what I've already been telling you otherwise anyway. Ay. So, okay, yeah. Anyway, on that note, I hope you all have enjoyed kind of watching the videos in the background while I've been ranting on and on and on. And I hope you all don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you are new to my channel as a whole. And I hope to catch you all again later. Happy hunting, stay safe out there, and I will catch you all again next time.